The question is, what do this wholesale deal, this rehab and flip deal, this master lease deal, this subject to deal, and this buy and hold deal all have in common? They all were closed with my perfect real estate contract. Hey, this is Charles Blair, the Mad Scientist, and I want to personally thank you for tuning into this video. And don't forget to smash that like button, leave a comment, and subscribe to this channel so that you can be updated as soon as we put out information-packed videos just like this one for you. Now, I'm going to give each and every one of you guys an opportunity to get your hands on the perfect real estate contract, and we're using it in 6 different markets. And as I stated, I used it to close every one of those deals that you saw. All you have to do is just leave a comment below, and I will make sure you get this simple, perfect real estate contract. Now, let's dive in deep and show you exactly how to fill it out. Okay, as you can see, this is what I like to call my standard real estate purchase and sale agreement. It's only 3 pages, and I'm going to go over exactly what the details and what you need to fill in of this agreement. For example, in this first section, it talks about the parties. And what do you mean by the parties? It means the buyer and the seller, or the people that's involved in this actual contract. Their name goes on this section here is to as buyer, and here is to the information for the seller. Now, you also want to place in this area information of the address of the property. So this section covers the details, legal description and address, and seller and buyer information. Now, on this section here, where it says number 1, you're dealing with the actual financial terms of the deal. And let's break it down. Section A, the earnest money deposit. What goes in here is the dollar amount that you plan on giving the seller as an earnest money deposit. Number B, the balance due at closing. So let's say you're giving the actual seller a total of $100,000 to buy this property. Well, you're giving $1,000 down. Well, that means that the balance due at closing is $99,000 because you already gave them $1,000 of the $100,000. Section C. And here is where you deal with if you plan on getting a loan to buy the property. Now, I'm not talking about a hard money loan. We're talking about if you're getting conventional financing and you need to be approved for conventional financing to buy the property. That would go here in Section C. If it's not something that's happening in the deal, you just leave it blank. Section D talks about the seller financing. If you plan on executing this deal as an owner finance deal, the terms would go here in this section. So owner financing is dealt with Section D. Now, Section E is if you plan on doing subject to or master lease. In this area, you're putting in the information of the lender, the loan amount, the loan number, the interest rate, the fixed rate, adjustable rate, principal, interest, and insurance per month. Because this is a subject to section that you would fill in if you're doing subject to. Now, if there's a second loan on the property that needs to be covered subject to, then you'll also do Section F. And Section G is the total price that you are going to buy the property for. So if you're buying it for $100,000, then the total price would be $100,000. So that's all that's covered in this part 1 of the contract. Now, in part 2, it says seller will pay will pay 1/2 of all closing costs. Now remember, this is geared towards a contract that you can change any way you want. So number 2 covers the closing costs and who's responsible for transfer taxes and so on. So it could be a 50-50 situation where the buyer pays their closing costs and the seller pays their closing costs, or you could easily say the seller responsible for paying all closing costs. Or you could tell the seller, hey, I'll pay all the closing costs if you do this deal with me. So it's really a living and breathing document. I want to urge that you do not take it verbatim. It's meant to be geared towards whatever that transaction that you structure with that actual seller. Number 3, payment of expenses. It tells you if buyer fails to perform, the seller can keep the earnest money deposit. However, if the seller fails to perform, they may have other remedies that you can incur on them. So this section covers what happened for payment and expenses if individuals fail to perform, the binder deposits, and so on, who gets what and who's responsible for covering that cost. Number 4, prorations. So when we're dealing with prorations, we're talking about any prorated amount that could be left over from, let's say, property hazard insurance policy. It could be from the escrow. It could be hazard insurance. It could be from a number of different things that could have a prorated amount that's due. In this section, it tells the actual person that any and all prorations are to go to the buyer. Remember, I told you, this is a buyer-friendly contract, but you could easily change it or word it any way so that you don't have to deal with all of the actual verbiage that's in this section. It's up to you how you want to change it, but we have it set up for the buyer to receive all proceeds from prorations. Now, when it comes to section number 5, now we're talking about title examination, place, and time for closing. So basically, this is the date that you say that you will close this deal by. That's all that's going through this section. It tells you that if it's not closed by this date, that you can request an additional amount of time and so on, that you plan on using your closing attorney or title company. So that's all that this section is for, where it says number 5, title examination, place, and time of closing. Now, number 6, loss or damage. This section covers who's responsible for actually if the property gets damaged before it goes to closing from vandalism or from a fire, and the actual people that is responsible for curing this issue. So the way the contract is written, the seller is responsible for giving you the property or fixing any damage that is done to the property prior to closing that you have to approve on. So if it catches on fire, the actual seller is responsible for fixing the property back up in the condition that it was prior to the fire. If it gets vandalized, then the actual seller is responsible for fixing it up to the condition that it was prior to the vandalism. And if they don't, you have the right to back out of the contract. Now, properties, section number 7. Section 7 just says that the property condition shall be in the same condition at closing that you last approved it. So if you went to the property and it was in the type of condition that you wanted to put it on under contract, it has to stay in that condition. They are not supposed to take out anything out of that property unless it's in that same condition that you agreed on to take the property over. Number 8, occupancy. The seller represents that there are no parties in the property at the time of closing. In other words, you're saying that the seller has to be moved out of the property, and at the time of closing, you have to have access to prove and or get copies of keys at closing stating that the property is now vacant. Number 9, personal property. Included in the purchase price are all fixed equipment, including window treatments, built-in appliances, refrigerator, floor coverings, stove, air conditions. So this basically says that you get all of this as part of the property, or you can negotiate it so that the person can keep the stove or they can keep a refrigerator, yada, yada, yada. Remember, I told you, this is a buyer-friendly contract. Number 10, default and attorney fees. If the buyer defaults from this contract, the only remedy that the seller has is that they can keep the earnest money deposit. That's the beauty of this contract. It gives you a way out without having you to worry about being threatened to be sued, because it's written in the contract. As long as you cover any expense that you covered that was part of the actual deal, you can back out of this contract with only the issue of losing your earnest money deposit. However, if the seller refuses to sell for any reason other than those herein, the seller and buyer here to resolve the dispute through binding arbitration, with all costs of such arbitration to be borne by the losing party in accordance with procedures outlined by state law. So if they fail to perform, you can sue them to perform, and which we've done before. Number 11, zoning and restrictions. Seller warrants property is zoned residential. Should buyer discover any proposed zoning changes unacceptable to buyer prior to closing, the buyer may void this agreement. So 11 just talks about zoning and restrictions. Number 12, maintenance. Until title is delivered, the seller has to give the property in the current maintenance condition. They have to upkeep the water situation. They have to upkeep the electric. They have to upkeep the actual property condition. They have to make sure they're doing whatever needs to be done to keep it property and maintained in a maintenance level that you have approved of, based on your walkthrough and acceptance of wanting to do this property contract. Number 13, if you plan on putting a note or getting a note from the seller, the details of that note goes into section 13. That's all. If you're not doing that, you can leave that extra area blank, or you can exit out to make it so that the seller knows that it doesn't apply. Section 14, survival of agreement. This agreement shall survive the closing, execution, and delivery of a special warranty deed as agreed herein by the undersigned. Buyer is a licensed real estate professional in the state of Maryland. Now, of course, if you're not a licensed real estate professional, you can take this out. But my partner was in this transaction on this deal. So I wanted to make sure that the disclosure was there that the person is a licensed real estate professional so that you are covered if you are an agent. Number 15. Parties hereby agree that the buyer shall have the right to assign this agreement. This allows you to wholesale the deal. Number 16, additional terms, conditions, or exhibits. Now, if you have anything else you want to write in here, for example, some type of inspection contingency, or some type of financing contingency, or a partner visiting contingency, you could put it in section 16. And section 17. There are no other agreements, promises, or understandings between these parties except as specifically set forth herein. This is a legal and binding agreement
construed under Maryland law. Now, of course, guys, if you're not in Maryland, you want to take out that state information and use whatever state information you want. Now, here goes my legal disclaimer. I am not a lawyer. So don't try to sue me if somebody said, oh, you can't do that. So, the last section is this. The buyer's information, date of offer, the seller's information, date of acceptance. And what I mean by that, seller's name, buyer's name, and seller's contact information. Home number, work phone, cell, home address. Now we have Social Security there, but the only reason why we do that is because that's what the actual title company is going to get from the actual sellers when they go get ready to the actual closing process. So you don't need to get Social Security information from your seller.
I told you, with that contract, you can do all types of transactions with the same paperwork. You can do subject to, master leasing, owner financing, straight rehab, and also wholesale deals using the same contract. And if you want to get a copy of it, all you have to do is just leave a comment below. This is Charles Blair, the Mad Scientist, signing out, and I'll see you in the next video.
Ay, ay.